Welcome to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast, brought to you by the Sales Enablement Collective. Each episode, we sit down with sales enablement and revenue leaders from around the world and invite them to share their expertise and experience with the community. On the show today is Jonathan. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming onto the podcast. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Excited to be here.
So could you introduce yourself for our listeners, give a bit of background and just explore a little bit about who you are before we dive into today's episode?
Yeah, for sure. So for over a decade, I was a product marketer in the B2B space. So I worked in-house at a wide range of kind of industries and company sizes, everything from, Fortune 500 insurance, mid-size HR tech, a cybersecurity startup, and a whole bunch of kind of other startups and SMBs. A few years ago, I realized, look, love the startup space, but I really want to explore more industries and more company stages. So I started Blue Manta Consulting, which is a product marketing consultancy. We specialize in B2B SaaS startups. So that's kind of my main gig. Apart from that, volunteer as a product marketing mentor through ADP List. I'm a go-to-market mentor for Chicago's largest startup accelerator, which is 1871. And then on a personal note, I'm low-key obsessed with cheese and Turkish pistachios.
That's awesome. And it's a great sort of background. We don't get to speak to product marketers too often on the podcast, but it's such an important relationship with enablement that it's one that's going to be really cool to explore. And so that is what we're talking about today, is that relationship between product marketing and enablement, particularly in the startup space. And I think the best place to start is asking you, how do you see product marketing and sales enablement working best together in sort of early stage startups? How have you experienced that relationship? What are your sort of, gold star sort of standards for that relationship?
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think the kind of cop out is it depends, right? It varies. Every startup is different, and product marketing in every startup is different, and so is sales enablement in my experience. But kind of the most effective setups I've found are where product marketing focuses on the what and sales enablement focuses on the how. So what I mean by that is, product marketing figures out, okay, what are the goals? What does sales need to know? AKA, what is the product knowledge they need to know? What do they need to be able to convey? Meaning, kind of what's the sales pitch? Excuse me. And then what do they need to be able to show, right? So, for example, the demo, right? What are the key items or features or things that they need to show? There's other components like competitive intelligence, objection handling, et cetera. But the focus is product marketing focuses on what is it that we need to convey, show, explain, et cetera. And then sales enablement is really figuring out the how. So how do we accomplish these goals? How do we deliver training in the most effective way? How do we build, the right role play scenarios? How do we build the right courses? And how do we really educate sales on, the product, the demo, the pitch, et cetera? So it's kind of a division of labors where product marketing focuses more on the what, sales enablement focuses more on the how. But again, they're co-creating the entire time. It's not like hey, let me throw it over the fence. It's more, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you need from me in order to make this, the best, the most effective kind of sales enablement possible.
I love that. That's really a nice sort of way to divide it. And I guess that the follow-up for that is, like, sometimes we see product marketing doing enablement or being responsible for enablement before there's even an enablement team. How does that dynamic change when a dedicated enablement team is formed, or the business decides it's time to have a dedicated enablement function? I imagine maybe there's a little bit of worry about handover. That kind of can be difficult sometimes. What can be done to make that as smooth a transition as possible so that you end up with two teams working together as they should, like you mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, look, having a sales enablement team for product marketers is a luxury, right? So if you do it right, the dynamic should change in a kind of a beautiful way. Because if you think about it, when you have an enablement team, especially those that are embedded in sales, right, which is my preference, if not that I have a vote, because I'm, but when sales enablement is embedded within the sales team, it's kind of the best of both worlds, because the sales team gets kind of like that strong advocate that ideally has already been a salesperson before. So they know what works, what doesn't. They get a lot of credibility with the sales team. They know how the sales team likes to learn. And they're basically, kind of a major advocate for sales. And then product marketing gets this like super strong partner that takes kind of product marketing's foundational knowledge and maximizes its effectiveness, because they know exactly what sales wants, because they work with them, they were salespeople, so on and so forth. They also know what product marketing wants because, again, we've built a relationship. We kind of explain what we're looking for, the goals, why we're trying to train sales on X, Y, and Z. And that really helps. But to get to your question in terms of like, how do you make it more of a smooth transition? I think it's helpful to align on goals before starting anything. So between sales, between product, and between product marketing, and sales, product marketing, and sales enablement. For example, let's say this quarter, I don't know, we want to increase win rate by 10% for a specific product, right? So let's just say Q3, Q4, like that's our goal. Great. So once you kind of have that like top level goal alignment, then it's helpful to understand kind of what the swim lanes are, meaning like, for product marketing versus sales enablement, like what are the general areas or initiatives that each team is responsible for? And that's where something like a team charter comes in really handy, right? Where you kind of explain, okay, this is what sales enablement does. This is what product marketing does. Here are key KPIs, here are KPIs, here are goals, so on and so forth. So once you have goals, once you have kind of swim lanes established, then you want to kind of think through, okay, swim lanes is say what type of work we do, but what are the major initiatives we're working on now? So when you identify those major initiatives, you can kind of tackle them together as a team, like sales enablement and product marketing. You can co-create the plan, you can co-create the strategy, you can divide up the tactics. Because even though you have these swim lanes, even though you have these team charters, the reality is always a little bit different, right? So to give you like a concrete example, let's say, we're launching a new product, right? So we're launching a new product. Part of that obviously includes, we got to have a new demo, which means you need a new demo script. You need to explain to sales, hey, here's what we need to show. Here's what we need to say. So product marketing might tackle like kind of the overall narrative, right? So maybe we'll give like high level bullets on messaging. Maybe we'll create a list of like, okay, you want to show A, B, C, and D feature in that order. And then we might work with sales enablement, and sales enablement might say, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and choose what is the right script format. Why? Because they know the sales team. They know, okay, the majority of sales team wants, high level bullets. Or, hey, there are these 3 or 4 kind of more junior sales reps that want an actual word by word script. So again, sales enablement kind of figures out the format. They're going to actually create the demo script. Maybe they'll create multiple versions. And then in a perfect world, they're going to actually work with a sales rep to pilot it, right? Have that sales rep actually test it out a few times with customers, refine it, and then train the sales team. So just to summarize, I think I'd say 1, focus on the high level goals, right? Develop those joint goals. 2, establish a swim lane so it's clear. Here's what product marketing does. Here's what sales enablement does. And then at the same time, co-create those initiatives and really kind of blend the swim lanes a little bit to help each other out where it makes sense.
I really like that. Really insightful sort of to get to, especially with those examples. And I love the call out of the sort of the charter as well. It's something we've talked about in the podcast in the past, and sort of how important that can be to enablement. So it's nice to get the call out from the product marketing side and seeing the value as well. I guess following from that, our audience is obviously enablement professionals. What do you wish enablement teams knew about working with product marketing? Is there any sort of hiccups you've sort of continually run into in your career, or sort of trends that tend to pop up that will be solved if enablement just knew something in particular about product marketing that maybe they don't take into consideration enough?
That's a good question. Let me think about that. So something that sales enablement would know about working with product marketing. So I don't know if this is exactly the kind of answer you were looking for, but it's a reality. So I think the biggest kind of hiccups that happen between product marketing and sales enablement is more on the product marketing side than on the sales enablement side. And the reason why is because I think, at least for me and most product marketers I know, is it's really hard for us to let go. So if we're working with sales, which unless you're at a strictly PLG company that doesn't even do SLG for enterprise, like if you're working with sales, which most of us do, it already feels like you're letting go a little bit because you're giving kind of this crafted messaging, this crafted positioning, this pitch deck, et cetera. You're already giving it to sales, and then they're taking your material and moving forward. When you add yet another layer with sales enablement, it feels like you're giving up even more control. You're giving up more access to sales. So I think a little bit of empathy and collaboration really does wonders. And again, I think most sales enablement and product marketing get along great, but just having that empathy to say like, hey, like we're giving away our baby and it feels weird. And we know it's the right thing, but it's like you're sending your kiddo off to college and it's like, or they're moving to a different city and you're like, you know, it's the right thing, but it just like, it hurts. So just a little bit of empathy there. And then I think the one thing I would give that's more of kind of a tactical answer, I think to your question, is probably more what you were looking for is, I think a lot of product marketers kind of shy away from building relationships with sales, especially more junior product marketers, because it feels uncomfortable. And when you have a sales enablement team, it's very easy to use them as a crutch and say, hey, no, the sales enablement team is the one that builds the relationship. We don't. So I think for sales enablement to encourage product marketing to build direct relationships with sales would be huge. Product marketing is not going to try to usurp sales enablement or try to kind of take over what sales enablement is doing. But product marketing just has to have that direct relationship and that direct access to sales, because we're the ones that are going to get a pulse of what works, what prospects are saying, how the product roadmap needs to be changed, how the industry is changing, et cetera. So we can take those insights, go back to product, refine the roadmap, go back to kind of the fundamentals and change your positioning or focus more on competitors, et cetera. So I think I would say, yeah, that kind of encouraging product marketing to develop those direct relationships is huge.
Yeah, I like that, especially get both the emotional side and the tactical side. I think those are both two sort of valuable takeaways for our listeners. And I guess onto the next question would be, in terms of, we spoke earlier about sort of the startup focus as well. In large organizations, things tend to be a little bit more structured. You know, there's kind of more clear definitions. For an enablement professionals who's maybe moving from a large organization where they've had this sort of very well-defined relationship with product marketing, and then they move to a sort of startup, what sort of perspective shifts do they need to make in relation to working with product marketing? How does the enablement product marketing dynamic change at startups where maybe things are a little bit less well-defined?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you nailed it, right? I think that there's, in the question itself, it kind of answered it, right? There's a lot more blurred lines at startups versus larger orgs. In my experience, at least, it's more likely that you treat initiatives on a case-by-case basis and you divvy up the workload based on like available bandwidth, and it's kind of more flexible and agile. So what I mean by that is like, well, I mean, I guess the other point is like, there's way more urgency and less like padding at a startup. So to give you an example, if you're at a Fortune 500 and maybe there's like a specific product that doesn't sell as well as it could be, it's not horrible, but maybe it's like, I don't know, 30% win rate instead of 40. Sure, that's an issue, but like your company's not really going to go under because of it, right? You're at a Fortune 500, you probably have dozens, if not hundreds of products. Like it's not the end of the world. At a startup, like number one, you have direct access and accountability to C-suite, which is very different than, you know, if you're at a Fortune 500, the CEO has no idea who you are, right? Most likely. But so at the start of this, you have direct access to C-suite and the founder. And if the product doesn't sell well, one, it actually means, yeah, the company could go under, right? But two, the stakes and the pressure are much higher because the founder's like saying, hey, bud, like, what's going on? Like, why aren't you working on this? Like, why aren't you making this better? So the reason why that matters in terms of the sales enablement product marketing relationship is because you actually have to build really, really strong relationship across sales enablement, and product marketing in order to continue to move the product forward and move the kind of the enablement process forward. Because if not, what happens is as soon as something goes wrong, you start blaming and pointing fingers when the going gets tough, as they say. So I think that's the really big point there is like relationships matter, I think, even more at the startup level. And I think the pressure is higher and the agility is higher. And then also the lines just, they blur way more, which honestly, I think, yes, is less efficient. So it's less maybe structured as kind of at a larger org, but it's also the reality. And then also that flexibility also kind of builds stronger relationships by definition.
That makes a lot of sense. But pros and cons to sort of both ways. I wanted to touch on something that comes up regularly in our sort of sales enablement landscape report, which is who owns the sort of content creation process and sales collateral for reps, enablement or product marketing. The responses are usually a mix of one team, a mix of the other, sometimes both working together. When it comes to content creation, what do you see as like sort of the best way to approach that from a product marketing and enablement perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with the survey. For me, it's a co-creation thing. And I would go a little bit further and say it really depends on like the specific people involved and the piece of content. So like to give you an example, like I could never give up creating the pitch deck right? It's, to me, it's like something that's so fundamental that like I'd definitely be happy to like co-create it with sales enablement, but it's not something that I could ever like give up 100%. Versus like something like a one pager or maybe training material. If sales enablement wants to drive that, great. Like we can collaborate, product marketing can share like key components. Typically it's like audience, key messages, kind of the goals of the piece, like why are we creating this to begin with? And sales enablement can say, oh, actually, the best format isn't a one pager, it's XYZ. Or hey, I know you were thinking this would be a one pager is actually 3, so on and so forth. Like we got to trust sales enablement to create the content that makes the most sense for sales. And then the other part is, like I mentioned, individuals. So the reality is, like, sometimes a particular sales enablement pro is like fantastic at creating content, the product marketer isn't, or vice versa. So I think that plays a role. So I mean, for me, it comes down to like, one, what person is best equipped to create the piece in a way that achieves the goals for it and ensures messaging is consistent. And then also just realistically, like, who has bandwidth? Because at a startup, you never have a ton of bandwidth. If the sales enablement person has, a little bit more bandwidth, or the product marketer has a little bit more bandwidth, then I think there's also that flexibility as well. But it should be focused on kind of who can achieve the goals and who can keep the messaging consistent.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense, and I love the call out of the trust as well. That's got to go both ways as well to build that relationship, like you mentioned earlier. I guess the next thing I wanted to ask was, if you had to pick a sort of top 3 or pull 3 items out, what are sort of the most important areas that product marketing and sales enablement need to collaborate on in startups? Like you said, there's not a lot of bandwidth. What are the sort of the highlights where, if someone's sort of really focusing on developing that relationship between the two, where are those sort of key areas that they need to hone in on?
Yeah, no, fair point. So 3 areas to hone in on with product and sales enablement. I think the most kind of top of mind one is sales training, right? I think that's where product marketing kind of misses the boat the most. We try to be like, it almost feels like it's kind of ironic, right? So like when you think of product marketing with customers or prospects, like we focus on like, hey, let's keep the message really simple. Let's like be really clear, whatever. And then when it comes to sales, we're like, hey, we're going to just like vomit information at you that's just like 16 pages long, and it's like 14 trainings, and you need to know all these things. And I think sales enablement, like one of the superpowers that sales enablement has, is they kind of pare all that down and say, no, like we don't need all this. Here's what we actually need. Here's the format we need it in. I love that you wrote 16 pages. No one on our team is going to read that. We actually need a video. We actually need an in-person training, so on and so forth. So I think sales training is kind of number one. Partially to make up for product marketing. And there's some product marketers that are great trainers. I'm not going to say they're not, but just, painting with a broad brush. And then 2, I think, is product launches. So product launches are so fundamental, especially at the startup space, where you just really need them to go well, and you need them to make a big impact to your bottom line and top line for that matter. And you need sales enablement to kind of push that and be your partner and saying like, hey, here's why we're launching this. Here's what you need to know, and kind of galvanize the troops. And then I think the third one, which is maybe less obvious, when I think of sales enablement, like to me, one of the superpower sales enablement has is really understanding not just sales, but the sales process. So what I mean by that, and by the way, we've talked this whole time about sales. In my experience, sales enablement also helps customer success, right? So it's too long for me to say sales and customer success, but let's just assume they're included. But my point is, like, sales enablement knows kind of the sales process at the beginning, at the end, right? Cross sells, upsells, renewals, churn. They should know customers. They should know the sales reps. So they have a really kind of unique and deep understanding of all that. So to me, and then product marketing on the other side really understands customers and prospects, really understands the market, really understands the product, should understand the sales process as well. But maybe doesn't have the same, maybe they weren't a sales rep and maybe the sales enablement was, so on and so forth. So to me, what that lends to is like, inevitably there's going to be go-to-market problems, right? Like something's going to not go well. Maybe the win rate's low, maybe churn's too high, retention isn't going, cross sells aren't going where we expect, et cetera. So partnering on go-to-market problem diagnosis, like diagnosing what is wrong with our go-to-market and then also resolving it, like that's huge. That to me is like, massive collaboration between sales enablement and product marketing, where we can go in from our respective viewpoints and say, hey, here's what we think is going on. Okay, great. How do we work with sales or customer success to test that theory, and then to if it does work, to kind of make it kind of the de facto or the default kind of way we do things now. So I think those are the big three, right? Sales training, product launches, and then kind of this go-to-market diagnosis resolution one as well.
I love that. A lot to sort of stew on as well for our listeners. I think before we wrap things up, what should a sort of the biggest takeaway be for a listener, especially since we don't get product marketing guests too often on the podcast, in terms of, so for someone listening, they're in enablement and they're sort of trying to really understand the product marketing side of things, particularly in that startup side. What is like sort of the big takeaway you want them to have from this conversation? What is like the message that you want to sort of send out to enablement people listening, so that hopefully it can make that relationship building just that little bit easier in sort of their current role, their next role, whatever it might be?
Yeah. I think product marketers are kind of the classic A-type, really want to control everything, really want to see outcomes, etc. And because of that, hopefully they're great partners to you, but sometimes it's possible that they have trouble letting go. And just like founders that have trouble letting go, kind of a similar situation, which I think we've all kind of experienced if you worked in a startup. I think if you can remind them why you're there, remind them of the charters you've created, remind them of the joint goals, the initiatives, etc., and kind of build that trust over time, you're going to succeed, a lot more of the time and a lot faster. And the other part is, like, I think sometimes product marketers are wrong, and we have a really tough time admitting that. And I think sales enablement is in a good place to do that in a tactful way, and maybe in a way that sales isn't always. So I think, again, building that relationship, building that trust just leads to better outcomes. And I would advocate, for sales enablement to kind of think of product marketing and sales as two kind of equal partners, and advocate for both. And I think that's kind of the path forward.
I love that. Hopefully there'll be some way more transparent sort of relationships coming in after this episode, from people sort of taking that advice. It was really cool to sort of have your perspective on, so really appreciate you taking the time to share that. Lots of little bits for our audience to take away from, implement, and hopefully we'll see some much better relationships sort of going forward between the two teams. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming on and sharing all of that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to the Sales Enablement Innovation Podcast. Be sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice so you don't miss a thing. And if you're hungry for more sales enablement content, visit our website salesenablementcollective.com for articles, events, and an easy way to join our Slack community, home to thousands of your sales enablement peers.